Today, I sat down with Dr. Michael Conforti. Really, really enjoyed this conversation. He's a Jungian analyst and the founder of the Assisi Institute, and he is the author of two books, Threshold Experiences, The Archetype of Beginnings, and Field, Form, and Fate, Patterns in Mind, Nature and Psyche. We get into some really cool topics. I've been a fan of Carl Jung for many years, and I've been puzzled by his work and confused by it, and also intrigued, and it's really shaped my life. So finding Michael was a really cool opportunity, and the ability to talk to him. He's very soulful and caring and passionate, and hope you enjoy the episode. All right, so we should be good. You could hear me well on your end?
Loud and clear, really, really clearly.
Excellent. So thank you for doing this. I really appreciate that. I'd like to get started by just maybe getting a background on yourself, your work, and your institute, and you can expound on that as much or as little as you like, but for the audience.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I'm not going to do the whole personal history, but just the way of framing some of this. Grew up in New York with first and second generation immigrant people. We're from Sicily, a family in Calabria. And I always loved the old world since I was a kid. I remember one set of grandparents from Sicily, the other set from the Amalfi Coast, from Naples. And as a kid, I remember the different sounds. Like in Sicilian, ma che bello picciolino, che bello picciolino. What a beautiful little kid. And that's Sicilian. In Neapolitan, che bello ragazzo. And I said, I didn't know what it meant. I was 5 years old, but I knew there was something there in the difference. And my father's family, the ones from Sicily, they never really assimilated to America. And I loved that. I loved it. Being there were the best memories of my life, being there with the old world and not even Italian, a dialect you heard growing up, and 15, 20 people, 40 people around a table. And somehow it shaped my life. And to this day, it's the most important memories. And I realized, I think it set the tone for what my values are. I mean, they were very simple people, simple in the sense of education and, cooks and farmers and fishermen, whatever. And I never lost those values in terms of fishing and what mattered, still knowing gardening, something sacred about gardening. And Jung's work I got to when I was probably 19 years old. I was in college. No, before that, I was in community college in New York. And a teacher mentioned two words in a course called personality theory, anima and alchemy. I had no idea what he's talking about. I never even heard the words before. Somehow, my psyche responds to some words, and they just like a bell goes off. I say, I don't know what I mean, but it's going to be important. And I followed that, and it began shaping me. And I hadn't even read Jung. I didn't know who Jung was at that point. I began reading Jung, and I had some really very powerful experiences. When I started reading, 17, 18, 19 years old, and 19, I went to another college up in Vermont. We were able to go away for 3 or 4 months and get full credit. So I'm going to Zurich to become an analyst. I was 19, right? And I went with a friend. I sent my paperwork in, $100 application fee and all. And I'm going to begin my analytic training. I don't read the fine print. My sensate function is pretty bad. And I didn't read. I got to Zurich, and Jung's niece was there, Frau Baumann-Jung, and she said, who are you? I said, Conforti. So you're Conforti. I said, well, I'm feeling kind of nice. Well, yeah, so even know who I am. She said, just go home. You're too young. You're 19 years old. Come back when you're older. You got to be 27. I said, well, I can't be an analyst. She said, maybe someday. But the point is it was set. The template was already etched by this. And then in New York, and I went to visit the Jung Institute in New York, and as they say, the rest is history. And I went there, I met the woman that ran the library, and she said, "You're young." He said, "Yeah, I'm young." She said, "I'll see you in 2 years from now when you're old enough." I think I was 24 at the time when I went there. So when you come back, and I got there, and I was 26, really young. I began, and she said, "Well, I was waiting for you." I knew you'd get here. So.
What do you think it is about? What do you think it was about Jung or was there some sort of deeper? I did listen to you in another interview saying you just felt um, like compelled, almost like a daemon or a diamond. I don't know how to say the words correctly, but
Diamond, yeah.
yeah, they were almost compelled to this field, and I think that a lot of people experience that in different fashions. And then also, why do you think that they told you you had to be older? Is it because the ideas are so complex and you needed more experience? What do you think that was?
Well, number one, in terms of why 19, you're too young to take this on, to work with patients
Mm,
and the materials. You got to be in life somewhere. You got to experience life. You got to get more bangs and take your bruises and all that for life, and to have more, to do more living,
mm,
more relationships and all that goes with relationships and trying to make a dollar and figuring out your career and what. And they were right about that. I mean, I was still one of the youngest ever. I think there were a handful of us around the world back then. I'm talking about 1979. I began my training in New York. A handful of us around the world at 26 years old. We're still way young. Usually it's
mm,
midlife training. Number one. The other thing, your bigger question, which is a beautiful question, is he knew there was something else. He knew there
mm,
was a bigger world. And somehow I felt that that's why I began with the immigrant family, this stuff, You knew there was something else. It's not just the white bread we grew up with and the sandwiches and whatever. It's a whole different world, from the food to the languages. And that began to inform me in ways I couldn't articulate. There's something a lot bigger, Mike. There's something so much bigger than
mm,
what we see here. Something even informing, why did the Sicilian grandparents speak this way and the other one spoke a different way? What informed their language? And and Jung had that eye. It's like he was always looking to the material world, the real world, and all of the stuff that goes on with sex, drugs, and all of that kind of stuff. But he knew there was something even bigger. That even
mm,
behind the sex and drugs and whatever the fantasies and whatever it is that we're involved in, there's something moving you for some other reason. And he
mm,
sought to understand those reasons. And that really resonated with my psyche.
mm. Yeah, Young strikes me as very almost shamanistic, and if it was a different culture, he had a different education. He had a very shamanistic connection to
Yeah.
the spirit. I struggle to understand him still, but I'm getting better at it as I get a little older, which I find interesting. There was another thing in an interview. It might have been the same interview. You were talking to someone, and you said that you had always been connected to ideas. So, like the men, let's say the men in your culture, in your family, they were interested in fixing things, and they were having those discussions. But you felt more connected to ideas, and eventually you translated back to getting into like, oh, I'll learn how to fix my car or whatever. But um, what do you think? What do you think that is? I mean, that drive, is that just that
Well,
we're all different?
imagine one room where all the men are sitting talking about things, fixing cars and all
Mm,
that. I left that table. I went in with the women.
mm,
I was
mm,
more interested in cooking and preparing foods and all that. And I found what they talked about was more interesting. I mean,
mm.
my son got the gene to fix cars. The carpenter, he could do all that fixing cars. I say, Chris, come on over. It was him just called a minute ago. Can you help with the plumbing? This is where he said, Dad, you know how to do it. I said, no, you know me by now. I don't do that stuff. I'm not good at it.
Mm,
But that wasn't my orientation. It was much more to the world of the inner world and the world of the feminine than the world of the domestic that they cared about. It was very different. It was like the group of women sitting around a fire. I found that more enjoyable, you know,
mm,
for different reasons. And I found the other stuff is interesting. Like I grew up as an athlete, and I grew up as you know, not a superstar, nothing like that, but a really good athlete. I played competitive basketball into my 50s, actually. So
mm,
I loved that world of all that. But what was meaningful to me, Dylan, was the other stuff. It's
mm,
as though they knew something different and something that. While cars are wonderful for a certain temperament, my son, he could talk for hours about cars. For me, I'll do it because he loves it, But
mm,
and I want to be close to him, and we are. But if you ask me what I care about, let's go shopping. Let's go.
mm,
Let's talk about the dream you had. What about the baby? How you doing with the baby? Well, they're raising my grandkids in 4 languages. It's wonderful. It's a different orientation, and you can say in
mm,
many ways I was much more rooted in the world of the feminine than the masculine in that regard. And
Mm.
to this
I
day,
can
I mean,
relate to
I
that.
realize, what's that? You can?
I can relate to that in the sense that I think that I've been very interested in ideas and what's going on in people's lives, and I think that that has there's an intuitive baseline. And as a man, sometimes it's discouraged. Even though I have very masculine interests too, but um, but I do find that that's like an intuitive, again, almost like that inner world is somewhat feminine by nature, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's very different. And
Um,
it's tough because, the road out there for us as men usually is you got to go sit at the men's table, sit with them. And
mm,
I didn't want to turn away. I care about it, but it didn't speak to my soul. It didn't speak to my heart
mm,
and my soul. And I think part of the other question, what about Jung? What he cared about was what touches your heart and your soul. And it may be
mm,
something ineffable, something that maybe doesn't even make so much sense in the outer world. Why would you look? I grew up.
mm,
My family, they're all uneducated. My father was a longshoreman, worked on the New York waterfront for 30, 40 years. My mother was a school teacher that always lied about how much education she had. And all the people we grew up with were plumbers and mechanics, whatever. And so
mm,
I found my way constantly going to this world. In many ways, Jung became a type of. I never thought about this right now. Your question, this regard, he was like the father that said, "This is a good world. This other stuff, it's a meaningful world. The other stuff is still great,
mm,
but it's not where your heart is, Mike." And to this day, look, I'm 70. I'll be 72 in a couple of weeks. I love this stuff even more today than ever. I really love it.
mm,
I don't want to work as hard as I am right now, but the caring about the material. Oh my God, symbols and how the symbol can move your life. How the one dream could turn your life around, Don. Who would have imagined? And then the
mm,
artistry that goes with learning the language of the unconscious. And so, look, I can go on for hours with this because I still love this stuff very much.
mm. So for someone, let's say, who's getting introduced to these ideas or who has interest in tapping more deeply into their soul and their unconscious, what's again for what is that exactly, let's say? Like what is going on in the unconscious and with, let's say, the shadow and with these dreams or what's calling people, these symbols that are calling people forth. How would you maybe explain that to someone who's just getting a grasp on the fact that that even exists?
It's tough for the youth. Like you talked about, why 19 years old? Why not 19 years old to do your training? Look, the first half of life, to say even the 19, 20, and 25, whatever, we're rooted in the outer world, basically. We're climbing the mountain, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Getting home, maybe eventually thinking about careers, relationships, gender, all the things that people, even today, is even more on the table for all of us that people got to deal with. The young people, I don't know how old you are, but people in their 30s today, it's difficult. 40s, money. Look, money is so tight. So there's a lot of emphasis on that, and often it's at the expense of the inner world. So how do you begin to
Mm.
say, you know what? And this is where Jung came in, and you kind of whispered in my ear, Mike, there's a whole other world. So somehow that's what you want to convey to somebody. I'll give you one story that may answer the question a little more. I was talking to a nephew many years ago, really bright guy, and he's in the arts, his profession now. He was in college at the time. We were talking, and he said, "Well, what do you care about?" He said, "I want to make a living. I want to make $1 million. I'm going back for 25 years." I said, "Okay, that's great. I want to make $1 million. What do you care about?" "Well, what I would do with the money." And this went on for 40 minutes. I said, "What do you care about? What do you,
Mm.
it can't just be the money. Money's going to be a byproduct of something. What do you really care about?" I was getting annoyed because I knew he had a beautiful heart and soul. And he finally said, Uncle Mike, I care about having an idea and bringing it to fruition. I said, now we got it. And that,
Mm.
and that, and that began to change in that many ways, not just that moment, but that is what carried him through his life. And he's become a very, very successful artist today. I mean, quite renowned in many
Mm.
ways. You probably know the name. But in the beginning, he couldn't see past the dollar signs and the savings and the investments and the 5%, 6%, whatever. But he finally got it when I was like a dog with a bone. I said, "Come on, you got to be more than this. Money's great, but
Mm.
what's driving it?" He said, I love having an idea and watching and investing in the idea, not money wise, psychologically investing in and watching what
Mm.
happens with it. So it's a tough thing to convey,
Interesting.
and Your question is really important because especially today with the way the world's going, I mean, we all know there's a lot of strife in the world, no matter what side of the divide you're on, or even trying to stand in the middle of it. We're losing sense of soul. We've done a conference in Italy. We do a conference since 36 years, since 1989, in Assisi, Italy, where St. Francis was from. And the past 2 years, the theme was Modern Man and Woman Still in Search of Soul, which is the title of one
Mm-hmm.
of Jung's books that he wrote almost 100 years ago. Anyway, I was talking to a colleague who worked with one of the great Jungians, Louise-Von. She worked with her for years. He said, "My God, that's
Mm-hmm.
not the right title this year. It's Soul in Search of Humanity." I said, "Oh my God, that's it." And that's the theme for this
Mm-hmm.
year's Italy program. And I realized it's like, chi sta bussando alla porta? Who's knocking on the door? And it's Psyche in different ways trying to get in. Even if you look at the world situation today, what is it trying to tell us? It's giving a big message if we have eyes and ears to listen to it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's Psyche trying to inform. I'll give you one piece. This is not political, but it's a very powerful, powerful piece.
Mm-hmm.
2015, a year before the election, when Trump first won. This is not about Trump, good or bad. We're not going there, okay? It's a big issue. We're not talking about it, but I'm talking about a psychological piece, an archetypal piece. A year before the election between he and Hillary Clinton, the whole world said he doesn't have a chance. Okay, every bookie, every New York, Brooklyn, Italian bookie would have put all their money on Hillary. During that period, a year before the final election, 85% of my patients dreamt of the election. I've never seen in my 40-year career. You know who won the election a year before it would happen? It was Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So it's saying that in the collective unconscious, in the American psyche, whatever Trump represents, again, you make your calls, good, bad, indifferent, savior, whatever you want to say it. Okay, but
Mm-hmm.
whatever he represents, that was already prefigured in the psyche. That's astounding to
Huh.
understand. Astounding.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's interesting because how, Jung had dreams about, like the wars and the bloodbaths that were going to come previously. I do feel like these themes exist in us, but again, it's not being talked about as much now. So you have these archetypal themes and just unconscious things bubbling to the surface that we are processing before we know we're processing them. And so they're acting out in our emotions and our dreams and our thoughts, underneath the surface, which
Yeah.
again is really really interesting. And I just don't know if there's a lot of narrative around that now. So it is cool what you're doing with the institute and with the conferences. So there are people being brought to it, but I think even modern psychology. I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I don't know what the psychological field looks like now in terms of formal education, but I don't know a lot of the psychology students I've spoken to. It doesn't seem like they're diving as deep into like psychoanalysis, and I don't know if
No,
that's a good thing.
I really have a dual training. Formally trained as a Jungian analyst at the Jung Institute in New York, and I have informal training in Freudian. I did both. Number one, again, it's very observant perspective. Very good what you're saying. People have, number one, they've all thrown out Freud. Freud's no good. It's outdated. It's nonsense. The
Mm,
work he did on memory and forgetting is brilliant. Absolutely.
mm,
It should stand the test of time. Even Jung's work today, rarely you're going to find it in a university.
mm,
Rarely. And in psychology, in the Jungian profession today, it's going through massive, massive shifts where Jung was all about the objective. What's the objective? What would Trump represent? What would Harris represent? What are the symbolic expressions of this? What does it mean? What does Putin represent? Say you dream of Putin, you dream of whatever, okay? What is it? What's the archetypal meaning? Not just what you think and where it's gone to today, which is, I think, is a travesty of absolute brilliance and contributions off the charts, fantastic. What is
mm,
archetypal and universal and pre-existent in the psyche? Like the dream of
mm,
Trump before the election, right? It's pre-existent. Has all become morphed into people's biases, what I think and what I feel. Trump is what I think, what I feel. Harris is what I think and what I feel. Jung is what I think and what I feel. And we've lost the investigation What's the dominant? There's got to be a dominant to your show here. Okay, we're not going to talk about it right now, but there's got to be a core, an ontological core that your show is about. That it's if someone said they had a dream about Dylan's podcast, there's something, even many different guests, okay, many different subjects, but I'm
Mm,
sure there's going to be a core that runs through it. That would be the work, but we've lost that from
mm,
all the fairy tales and symbols. Fairy tales are not just a Rorschach. You just make it up what you think it is. We have a faculty member that's following in the tradition of some of the great Jungians, and she's worked her tail off the past 6, 7 years, 10 years, studying fairy tales from around the world, looking at the
mm,
motifs, what it means when there's a father and daughter, father and son, mother and daughter. What's the opening of that story? What does it mean when an animal comes and it's a talking animal? It's a major symbolic expression. It's not just what you think. And psychology has been reduced to basically what's called constructivism, where it's you make up the meaning. That's not what Jung's work was about. Jung's work was, of course, your own, what you think is important, no question. But there's something bigger than your world. And that's what I was saying what drew me to Jung in the first place. There's a bigger world. It's not just what you and I think.
mm.
It's something more
Yeah.
profound.
Well, the images in fairy tales and in mythology, let's say, and even in religion, maybe there's a connection between this resurgence of psychedelic usage. There's a lot of psychedelic use now. I think that that's maybe an attempt to tap
Yeah.
into the archetypal. Maybe a good one, maybe a bad one in a lot of ways. And you mentioned Marie Louise von Franz, how you say it, correct?
I'm French, yeah, perfect.
Um, I wanted to ask. It might be you can elaborate and go in circles. It's okay, but I actually did want to ask about the Puer Aeternus a little bit because I have a book about that, and I also think that it's thematic for my time. I'm 29, and I think that like you said, people are struggling financially, so that creates a bit of an issue. But then also people are just also not being initiated into adulthood. Can you explain like a
Yeah.
little bit about the Puer Aeternus, maybe?
I spent a lot of time studying that. I also had a certain orientation around that when I was young. The
Mm-hmm.
Puer terms, what it means in Latin is eternal youth. Puer
Mm-hmm.
aeterni. So it's eternal youth, and it's about number one, an archetypal constellation, which has to do with somebody who's coming into the past the 20s, maybe late 20s, 30s, whatever, and is still maintaining these adolescent attitudes. Now it's complicated. This is not just what's wrong. Okay, we'll get to both right now. If you look at the behavior and the tendencies of a puer, they're often really interested in the excitement of life, the climb, the ascent, the the excitement, the great couple of dates, a great couple of first dates and third dates when the sex is great and the food's great and whatever. And then you know what? Can we talk? No, I don't want to talk. I want the good stuff. I want to taste the nectar of all the different flowers. And
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, what they're wedded to, see, that's where the work comes in. What they're wedded to is the vitality of life. And they find it in ways that are appropriate for the youth. Do the sports, do the sex, do the exciting things, make the climb. Okay, that's great. At some point, when you begin hitting your 30s, and that's where it gets into trouble with the Puers, they still want to maintain that overly adolescent attitude. And well, you do all this dating. You ever think about having one relationship? No, I don't want that. I don't want to settle down. If you ever think about a job, why? I'll give you a story. This is one powerful one of a Puer. When I was in my early 20s, I knew to become an analyst, you needed X number of hours of analysis, like maybe 100 hours. And at that point, I'm going back 40 years now, more, 50 years. There were only maybe 500 analysts, Jungian analysts in the world certified. So I was living in Amherst, Massachusetts at the time. And I saw in the library one day, Dr. So-and-so, Jungian analyst. And I said, oh, this is incredible because you don't find him anywhere, right? You don't find these Jungian analysts back then. Now, well,
Mm-hmm.
a lot more. And I called the guy up. And I said, my God, I get so excited to see your name and you're an analyst. Yes, I am. And I said, well, I want to begin analysis with you. He said, of course. And thank God my Brooklyn attitude came in, the Sicilian Brooklyn attitude. I said, oh, this is great, blah, blah. And he said, you were in Zurich. See, I spent many years in Zurich. I said, okay, great. And then it hit. The Sicilian piece is very cynical in some ways. Okay. So you said you were in Zurich. So you graduated from Zurich, right? Well, I didn't officially graduate. So what are you talking about? You just told me you did Zurich. I said I was there. I read the collected works by Jung in German and English, and I took classes. I said, excuse me, I'm asking a question now. Now Brooklyn comes out, right? I say, are you telling me you are official analyst? Well, I'm not official, but I do Jungian stuff. I say, excuse me. Oh, man, you know what? You're a fraud. We could all be
Mm-hmm.
coming to you under the guise you're a Jungian analyst. You're not. Maybe you do some interesting things, but you're misrepresenting yourself. And I realized at
Mm-hmm.
that point, by virtue of extension, if you could be willing to misrepresent yourself that way, I don't even think you'd be a good therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a fraudulent piece, and your question about the Puer. He was a Puer.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I trained in New York, I think it was 8 to 9 years. We're all there for many years to
Mm-hmm.
do it. It's a lot of work. And every class is not great. I commuted 7 hours each way to get there once a week. You live in hovels. You get a room at the YMCA wherever you can, right? That's how we did it back then. A bunch of us commuting. But you pay the price because it means something to you. You're willing to pay the price. He didn't want to pay the price. So you say, well, you criticize. Well, I'm criticizing because he wasn't willing to really engage the field of Jungian analysis in a way that was legitimate if you wanted to become an analyst. You want to learn Jungian psychology, fine. But don't call yourself an analyst. There's a difference. There's a
Mm-hmm.
difference. I
Understood.
mean, you ever learn a language? You know how much work goes into learning a language? My God. Idioms and
Mm-hmm.
the colloquial all it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime. And you take it on or not. But the Puer, I'll finish it right here. The Puer, they are unwilling to really take that commitment seriously and invest in it. Because I don't like, they're not all
Interesting.
classes I like. Well, excuse me, all life is not a dream, you know?
And that manifests in relationship too, as you're saying as well. So that's is and what do you think the harm of that is? If like, what do you think the benefits of, well, if there are benefits of being like novelty seeking, let's say, but also what are the negative aspects of that?
Okay, benefits are pretty obvious. And Von Franz right. She
Mm.
said, when you speak with someone who's very much of a Puer, it's like the wonderful bubbles of champagne, the excitement, the joy. Oh my God. And it makes you feel alive again, right? It's wonderful.
Mm.
The dark side is what we just talked about, is an unwillingness to get your feet dirty, get your hands dirty, and say, okay, look, I'm taking, say you want to be an analyst or whatever, and there are 4 courses a semester. Well, this one I don't like, and that one I don't like. This one I love, this one I like, okay, these two I don't like, so I'm not going to take them. That's not life. And there are
Mm.
things we have to take on, and most likely where that translates is, I mean, let's imagine you're dating somebody like this, right? And say you want to raise a family. Say it's a man or a woman. A woman they call a puella, the same archetypal issue. Is this a person you want to really commit to? Are they really willing to commit and have a family and all the things it takes? I'm watching my
Mm.
son right now with 2 kids. He's a 4 month old. The poor kid's exhausted. All the work involved that he and his wife does, and his sister-in-law who lives with them, all of the work of making a home and meals and finances and the absolute devotion to taking care of children. A 3.5-year-old and a 4 month old. Somebody
Mm.
who is just always looking for the scintilla, the excitement, and all that. They're not going to engage in that part of life. Now,
And do you
it's good for what they do, but it needs to be a transition point. They need to cross the threshold at some point, or the depression that comes with Puers when they hit their 40s and 50s is severe because they realize, wait a minute, the beautiful golden locks have begin to fade. I'm older, wrinkle. I can't jump what I did before. I can't do all the things I did before on a physical level. Maybe not as attractive to the women or to the men as they were before, whatever. And where am I? What do I have to show for this? Am I really living? Here's the soul. Am I really living what my soul wants me to do? Or I've been so invested in the good times, the scintilla, the
mm.
excitement, the climb, the whatever, the nectar of all the different flowers that we've been tasting. Is it really in line with my soul? What my soul wants me to do? Most
Hmm.
likely it's not. And that's a very deep depression that comes. And I've worked with a number of people like that. When you hit the 40s, sometimes late 40s, mid 40s, it begins because you're no longer a kid.
Hmm.
So it's tough. It's tough stuff, but it's a major archetypal issue.
Hmm. Where do you find the deeper? It sounds like when you talk about your family and your work, I mean, that's where you tap some of that really deep meaning, but it's also probably been the biggest sacrifice. Is that where you find the most meaning in life, or what gives you purpose?
It's a great, yeah, yeah. The thing about sacrifice, a major sacrifice for me because I had to leave it all. I left it
Hmm.
all to pursue my life and my training. I mean, I talked to my cousin. I have a cousin that's now deceased. We were like brothers growing up. And he would have, we were all one big Italian family. He would have dinners every night with his parents, with the cousins. All our cousins would get together. And he invited me for Christmas one year. I said, Bill, this is beautiful. Thanks a man. And he said, it's also kind of sad for me because I left all this. I came still come back for holidays. I did. And most of them are gone today. But I said, I left. He said, Mike, we talk about it a lot. We knew you had to leave to pursue what you cared about,
Hmm.
the career, the life. And you couldn't do it within the confines of a very tight Italian family where you never leave too far from the family. You don't go too far away. And and he was
Yeah,
right.
it's interesting
And
because I left. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona area, and my family is in most of my immediate family is in suburban New Jersey. But I had an opportunity, and I felt like I felt very psychologically trapped. Even if other people couldn't really tell, I might have seemed like happy, but I did feel trapped, and I felt like even if I return and I miss my family greatly, but I also just felt like I had to go west, and that I always felt west was the direction. I don't know why, but I can relate to that in a sense where you feel like you have to break out of your like tight comfort shell. Although it's really beneficial to have that, it's just also sometimes you have to break free.
you want a strange piece to
So,
look at with this, then, from what you're saying. There are times we sit back and we reflect, like you're saying, you reflect on what you did, right? As I had to leave. I
mm,
left the Italian family, you left an Italian family in New York, right? And you realize we're guided by unseen forces. The hero, if you look at Joseph Campbell, talk about heroes, whatever, the hero always leaves the community at some point. They're in the community, they learn the craft, whatever, and then they have to leave as part of the journey. The bigger the gift you carry, the more you got to leave. That sounds inflated,
mm,
but when you feel the scars of what you live with, it's not inflated. It's becomes a necessary thing. To live out your destiny, there are a lot of hits you take. Anybody's going to take the hits. The Sunday dinners, you say your grandma's Italian or whatever, Who wouldn't want more of those dinners? The beauty of hearing all of the cousins around that you grew up with. I adore all that. But I knew it was a path calling me. No, not calling, a path pushing me,
mm,
pulling me to do a different way of life. And thank God I have a whole new community now. I still have very strong ties with Italy. I go back every year for 36 years. Um, I speak pretty well Italian. I lecture in Italian and English, and um, it's part of my life. It's part of my son's life. He's a great. He cares about the culture and look at this community. We have over 40 countries around the world, over 45 right now, countries around the world involved with the work that we've been doing at CC Institute. It's astounding, and I realized I couldn't have done it back in the neighborhood in Brooklyn and whatever.
mm.
It
You,
wouldn't have worked in my life to have done it that way. And yeah, you miss it, so you pay a price. This is not. Oh, look at you, you're the great hero. It's not what it's about. Show somebody the scars on your arm. You know what I mean? You got to see the scars we carry with this stuff. That's real. This is not some.
mm,
I mean, the poor say it's my grand design. I had to do this. I had to do that, and they don't want to look at your back. You have scars on your back. What happened? They don't want to see all that. The scars bring you back to humanity when you carry it. I'm with it every day.
mm.
I'm aware of the price I paid. I had to pay it to live the life I have today. I had to leave that, and it's a pain I carry all the time. I admit it.
Hmm.
A necessary
Well,
pain.
there's sacrifice, and then there's also
That's the word.
when you're
That's
talking about
thank you.
people's scars, there's trauma too. There's a lot of in the past. I don't know. Maybe I was just young, but there wasn't as much narrative around trauma, and now I think trauma's discussed often, and I think that carries good and negative connotation depending on who's delivering the message. Um, what's your thoughts around trauma, at least from maybe from your perspective or a Jungian perspective? What are you seeing with people's trauma? What have you seen over the years?
Well, I've ended up specializing in trauma for 40 years in clinical practice for different reasons. I grew up in New York, as you did, and you see a lot of things, especially immigrant families, first gen, second generation. You see a lot of violence and things you really ideally shouldn't have to see. And you find some
Mm.
way in your life to try to make sense of all this. Why we see more of it today? I think it's we're all connected today with the newspapers and the radios and these little things with phones and computers. You see around the world. You can see Ukraine in a minute. You can see live bombings and whatever. So we know much more. We're much more informed about all this. It's in our face.
Mm.
The good part of that is, if there's a good part, is we really can't turn too much away from it because it's there. Just turn on your phone and maybe get news of the day before you even get your emails, right? You have to look at that. Working with trauma, I mean, I'll tell you a little story. I just gave a series of lectures in Israel, and I didn't do well. I'll tell you why. I mean, I love to lecture. I do really well at lecturing because I love to work and I have a way of communicating and to people from all different disciplines. And they said after the first day, they said, look, what you got to understand is once the thing happened in Israel, what we call the horror, the first day last October, was it? The bombings and all that, the horrible slaughters, the hostages. They said all of us in Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, we went to probably 40 funerals in 5 days.
Mm.
And so I was talking about the big picture of trauma, and then I realized I wasn't meeting what they needed because they wanted to know, what do you do? What do you do? What hands-on things you do? And I realized I have a different approach to this. I mean, that's needed sometimes, but that's not my approach. It's well, what do you do? Do you do the drawing? Do you do the painting and all that kind of stuff? Whatever. I learned differently, and I have a different sensibility. And you know the name Elie Wiesel?
Yes,
Yeah, he
the
shaped my life.
author of the yeah.
He did.
How did he change your life?
I tell you, I began reading his stuff, going to his lectures many years ago. I've read almost everything he's done. And then about 20 years ago, somebody arranged for a one-on-one meeting with him for me. So he was at Boston. He was at Boston College, Boston University, I think 2 days a week. And they arranged this like half-hour meeting, 40-minute meeting. I said, how do you prepare for this? You guys, you put roses on the ground, you rose petals. I don't know how to prepare. Because here's a man I admire. This is a man who lived through the Holocaust. He saw his father being killed in front of him. He saw his mother and sister being incinerated. And he greeted me very warmly, and we talked. And I said, this is the piece, your question. I said, I think psychology and a lot of human relations work and counseling and all this, the theology, whatever, we've done a real injustice to people that have deeply suffered and people that have suffered the unimaginable. And I knew I didn't have to describe what I meant by unimaginable with him. He lived the unimaginable. You see his face, all of the lines, like a map telling us what he went through. And he said, I agree with you, Michael. And this is what I tried to convey in the Israeli lecture, but I didn't do it well because they wanted something different. Like they wanted, how do you cook the meal? Not about what the
Mm.
meal's about. And he said, I agree with you. I think psychology and human relation stuff and all that has done a real disservice. And he said, I think the one attitude we need when we work with people that have been through the unimaginable is one thing. He said, it's a moral issue to work with them. He said, in all due respect, Dr. Wiesel, I don't understand what you mean moral. He said, moral is that you have to just be with them and offer them nothing in terms of techniques and gimmicks and strategies. Just be with them. He said,
Mm.
probably the greatest healing piece is just to sit with somebody that's been through that and you're not acting out. You're not jumping all over the room. You're not asking a million questions. What it feel like? Or what it feel like to watch your sister and brother and mother be killed? What are you kidding me? You really need to ask that
Mm.
question to somebody. You're thrown into hell. You can talk about the contours of hell, what it feels like. It was hell. What do you want me to say? And there's something about being able to say, I can't imagine. I cannot imagine what you lived through. Thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you. Okay. So that's been a lot of my work with trauma to create a space, a safe enough space, and also look at how they defend against the recognition of the trauma. That's huge. So it's a major, major part of my work. I actually just finished a session. I've been teaching a seminar for about 10, 15 years every Wednesday at noon. You want to come be my guest someday? And it's all about how patients defend against the recognition of trauma and how the unconscious communicates the nature of the trauma. Both. It's like, like a Janus faced God. One, how we deny it and how we have access to it by the stories we tell and by the dreams and by the repetitions in our life. So,
Hmm.
and when he said it's a moral response just to be there as honestly as you can without anything, no gimmicks, no nothing. I don't mean like the other therapies are gimmicks. It's not the point. But he said just to be there, to sit with somebody that's watched this stuff, watched their mother being beaten up by somebody. Are you kidding me? And to
Yeah, you
realize,
can't
have a sense of what
necessarily
it does
offer
in the psyche. What's that?
you can't necessarily offer techniques, I think, for all those experiences. You're gonna have to offer your presence and understanding.
And to learn about it. I mean, you remember the movie Sophie's Choice?
I never
Remember
saw
that
it,
movie?
but I'm familiar.
It's a brutal film where she was a young, beautiful woman with two kids, and she was taken to the concentration camps. Oh, she got off in
Hmm.
one of the cattle cars, right? And one of these commandants or one of the big leaders of the camp said, "I want to talk to you." She said, "Okay, look." He said to her, "You got two kids. We don't have room for two kids. You choose which kid is going to die."
Hmm.
What? It's a game? No. You choose which kid's going to die. Well, no. You take me. No. If you don't make a choice, I'll kill them both. Do you realize that what this is about? How does any psyche not crash and collapse and be fragmented forevermore after that experience? I mean, you have kids? No, maybe not yet. Yeah, maybe
You're
someday.
not.
Yeah. To see that somebody's going to take your kid and kill him, and you got to decide which is going to die. And anyway, this is where the
Yeah.
work comes in, right? I mean, aside from being in hell, at that moment she really only had one choice left once she decided, because she wasn't in therapy, wasn't working this through, and I knew in watching the movie, I didn't know the outcome. I said she's going to kill herself. She's going to kill herself. Why? Because you can't live with that. In the play Madame Butterfly, Puccini's Madame Butterfly, the young woman, the young girl, I forget what they call her in it, her name, but the butterfly, she has an affair with this American sailor and they have a baby, and he leaves. And she raises it, and he comes back like 5 years later. I want my son. Well, it's my baby. Excuse me, it's my baby. And you know what she does after she gives the baby, and then she kills herself because
Hmm.
we are not evolved to a point where we can handle such trauma. We're
Hmm.
not. Our defenses work only so well, but then they break down. So it's understanding
And
something
it's
about the nature of trauma and fragmentation is huge for this work.
also, I mean, bringing up the most profoundly tragic and negative human experiences segues a bit into the shadow. I mean, if we're talking about the Holocaust or slavery, some of these like really dark points in history that people either just look at and think like, oh, there was evil people doing that, and I'm not an evil person. How do people work with that? Because I think that thinking about it more in depth, realizing that like this is possible to happen if you organize minds in the wrong direction, or if you. I think that people don't want to look at the perpetrators of crimes too, or evil actions, but I think that's all part of us. I think that, and then also we're the victims of it too. We're the victims and we're the oppressors. And if we're looking at the shadow and the self
Right? You're right.
comprehensively.
You're right. I mean, Jung, he was onto this in many ways. Number one, he saw what was happening, as you said before. He saw what was happening in Nazi Germany before even the Nazi uprising. He saw it in the dreams of his patients. The way I said about Trump was prefigured. Let me think about the best way of saying this. Jung began the treatment when he said one of the first things that happen in treatment is you deal with the shadow, those unrecognized, the more darker parts of ourselves. And in the early days of this, back in 1930s, 1940s, 1920s, the shadow was something to really be reckoned with. Homicidal, aggressive, abusive, um, perpetrators, all that. People that molested kids, whatever. It was dark. It's been sanitized today. Well, you know what, Dylan? You weren't really that sensitive yesterday. You were a little bit insensitive. You really were, whatever. Really, is that really what the shadow's about? You weren't so sensitive. You know, it's much more powerful. We have a Jekyll and Hyde. That's why these old movies like Mr. Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. There are many stories about this in literature, and to come to
Mm.
grips with the really dark nature of this stuff. I mean, one major issue in therapy for people is dealing with what's called unconscious guilt over what we've done. Over you talk about talking about big shadow activities. Parents that were alcoholics for years and they, kind of ignored their kids. Parents that were gamblers. Parents involved in many indiscretions. Parents raising kids in environments where the kids have to see the mother or father, the mother being beaten, whatever. I mean, how do you live with this? You see, this is where my work comes in. How do you live with this? How do you put this in a glass somewhere and carry it without the thing cracking? A
Mm.
lot of it cracks. So I studied the mechanism, how we defend against it, and what the cracking like, and how do you find a way that let's make it. Maybe you need an extra thick one, an extra thick glass, to hold it. And then how do you find ways to say, do you realize that what you did to your kid by beating your wife in front of your kid for years? Watching your kid watching your mother being beaten, having her arms broken and her ribs broken by you beating her up. How do you live with
Mm.
that?
I think
That's
you're touching on important. You're touching on real themes that a lot of people don't. I mean, and you're part of this world, so you're talking to to people like the lowest among us. And I have a good friend who's a paramedic and a couple friends in law enforcement, and they have to see this stuff regularly, which is traumatizing, but it also in the right context can tap you into like to gratitude as well, realizing like, okay, I'm not experiencing this at this moment, or I've made it through this. But there's also a lot of people who, I don't know. I think that there's a benefit to tapping into human suffering and so that you can be grateful and see both ends of the spectrum.
necessary, absolutely necessary to bring humility and humanity into one's life. You got to look at it.
Mm.
Of course, timing comes in. You deal with patience. Sometimes maybe it's not right at this point to do whatever, but this is part of it. And so much psychology has been sanitized today. That's
Yeah. In
okay.
what
You
in
just
what
want
way
to.
do you think how's it been sanitized? How do you feel like it
How
has?
often do you hear therapists saying to a patient that must have been unimaginably traumatic and difficult for your kid to live with what you did? Not knowing if the electricity, seeing electricity flicker for 2 years when you're out gambling, whatever. What do you think that was like on your
Mm.
kid? Now you're listening to me say, okay, so Conforti, you're judging. I'm not judging anybody. Look at the unconscious. Look at how the
Mm.
unconscious represents it. The unconscious is unwavering in its need to present an objective presentation. The same with the body. If you got cancer, if you got tuberculosis, if you got liver problem, whatever, the body's going to tell you pretty clearly. It's going to tell you. It's not lying. It's the same way the unconscious, and the unconscious works in much the same way as the immunological system. It will inform us of what's been toxic, what's been of real consequence of what we've done and what's been
Mm.
done to us. See, a lot of therapy focuses on, come on, then look what they did to you. Look what your parents did to you. Look what they did to you. And that's, of course, a real part of it. It's necessary. But at some point, you got to look at, well, what have we also done? What have we done? We were in a position of authority or as a parent, whatever, or, you know,
So it sounds like
hold that memory.
non-victimhood also, like you're saying obviously you want to address where you've been hurt or victimized, but not dwelling on being a victim. I mean, what do you see a lot of harm in that, and do you also see that that's happening more?
To break the victimhood requires one to take responsibility for the consequence of what they've done with their life. If you've been out there as a, and we all have stuff we're ashamed of. Let's be real about it. We all have stuff we wish you could pull back.
Mm.
If you don't deal with it, you're going to continue being a perpetrator in some ways or end a victim. One's got to find a way to work it out. I mean, if you listen to most political rhetoric, you can hear what they're saying about their unconscious. They're revealing their unconscious in their policies.
Mm.
From any leader around the world, any country, you're going to hear it. If you develop an ear for this stuff and an eye for it, it's all there.
Mm.
Because the unconscious doesn't lie with this. Same way the body doesn't lie about this stuff. It's going to tell you accurately. It's your gallbladder. It's your appendix. Your appendix is going to burst. Go get this thing taken care of, will you please? Oh, I don't feel it. Whether you feel it or no or not doesn't matter. It's still going to blow if you don't take care of it. And you see, the other thing that's important for this discussion is that we have totemized the ego, what I think and what I believe. Okay? We put that on an altar and we worship it. Well, it's what I think, what I feel. That's important. It's a bigger world. And there was a study done years ago whereby if you imagine a circle, right? Just a circle, and there's 100 pieces of information in that circle you could pick up on. You know what the human mind generally perceives? What percentage of that? 7.4% it was found. So of that circle, of that giant pizza, the sliver wouldn't feed a bird. That's 7.4%. And that's what we base our life on.
Mm.
Well, that's what I think. I don't think that. Doesn't matter on some level. Of course, we want to know your frame of reference, but the world is so much bigger. And that goes back to the opening question, why Jung for me? He was aware of this stuff. He was always looking to the bigger world for information and guidance. And
Yeah,
when you
was
realize
he
it's
was
not,
tapped into something.
consciousness is just one play. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting that. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I think there's a slight delay sometimes with the video, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
he was very tapped into different, almost like a spiritual realm or the deep psychological realm, however you want to refer to it.
Look, we basically live our
Which,
lives as though we got paper bags over our heads. We walk around. We don't know what we're dealing with, what we're doing most times. We don't
mm,
know what our unconscious is doing by these policies, by these proclivities, by the behavior to a wife or a spouse, a girlfriend, or to kids, or whatever it might be. We don't really know the implication, but it's all there if you learn to listen. And that's why
mm,
we have the CC Foundation right now, and we take grants and all that stuff. But it's all about promoting the work of learning about this bigger world through dreams and unconscious communication. And we always take a group of like 6 or 7 international students with us to Italy, as scholarship students, to learn to help promote this in their own world, in their own country. I mean, so
so I had a couple questions. So and this goes, is on track of what we're talking about, but you said when you went to, I forget exactly how this was phrased, but you said that you wanted to run a conference. I was listening to this from another podcast or interview, but you were like, I've never ran a conference before, but I had this I had this sort of idea to run conferences. And then what was the terminology about, like, matter and spirit, or what?
it's a
Okay.
confluence of matter and spirit. Yeah, I remember like
Mm,
it was yesterday, 40 years ago now, probably, sitting on the wall. At first, I went to Sicily to visit my family for the first time over there. And then I made my pilgrimage to Assisi, which I've always loved, St. Francis of Assisi. I even went to St. Francis Prep in Brooklyn, high school. And I'm sitting on the wall, and then I hear these words say, you got to do a conference here dealing with the confluence of matter and spirit. I said, like, who's talking? Those weren't
mm,
my words. I never used those words. I never want to, like you said, I never want to do a conference. I'm not in the conference business. I am now. I do it, but it's not. It's not because of conference business. Because it's the work that I still love, learning and all, with leaders from around the world. But it came as truly an intuition, and inspiration, with words that were somebody else was saying them. It wasn't me saying them. I know it sounds kind of
mm.
schizophrenic, but it happens. It
Mm.
happens.
Is
But that was
What was
a
it about
defining.
matter and spirit? What was it about that specifically?
Well, many people that know something about the spiritual domain in that world, they can't tie their shoes and walk at the same time. They can't chew gum and walk, because they're so up in the other world. A lot of people that know about the material world, they have no sense of sensibility for the inner world. Doesn't matter. Let me fix my car. Let me just, hey, I got to go to the bank. I get interest. I got 6%. Whatever. Okay, that's all important. But there often were extremes, and some of the ancient healing practices, like alchemy, it was all about the confluence of matter and spirit. Where what alchemy was about, from what we could understand from Jung and many of the early writers, they were looking at the material world as containing the secrets to how to unleash the spiritual by dealing with the material world. And that's guided my work in many ways. Something profound happens when you cook. You cook a meal for people. You you cook in a way that you you allow the garlic to express its own nature, the aromas that come out from the basil, something sacred comes. And I realized that it was all about looking at the material world as telling about Psyche. And that was St. Francis. St. Francis would often say, look, I'm not smart like the Jesuits. I'm primitive. I sing to the birds, you know? But I worship God by singing. I don't do the deep meditation but the way other people do. It's different. I dance, I sing. And that's why we had to do it in Assisi. And I think that spirit was somehow calling me.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to sound like being the chosen one. It's not the point. But I just look at where this has gone. 40 years later. I mean, my God.
Well, I think
Look
there's
at where
something to following. I think there's something to following your intuition, and it's a little bit of that inner world, and maybe even has a feminine energy to it that's different.
yeah.
But we have to marry the two worlds because they coexist. But I do know what you're saying. I think sometimes people that are interested in material, they're not profoundly interested in ideas or spirituality, and then people that are hyper spiritual and interested in this other world, they're floating and can't hold down a job and stuff like that. So that's pretty interesting.
Well, like the Puers you're talking about, it becomes anti-spiritual eventually because it's not even a spiritual seeking anymore. It's a seeking just the excitement,
Hmm.
the neck of all the different plants. It's not even loving any of them anymore. It just becomes a mad dash for more, for more, for
Hmm.
more. To keep that like a drug addict. In some way, you got to get the next fix. So the Jungian piece, to summarize, it's a very meaningful way of life if you follow the way what the original people talked about, the Van Franz and Jung and Barbara Hahn, all the early greats. They knew about that world, They knew it was a sacred world. And they knew that to get guidance, you had to look outside of yourself, to listen to what nature says, listen to those voices, wherever they're coming from, that is saying, do this or do the podcast. Where's that coming from? You're not making money on this, I'm sure. You do it because you love it.
Hmm.
You want to learn, meet people, convey, share things. But the early Jungians got their guidance by saying, I wonder what Psyche is wanting to reveal by this image. Not just, well, you tell me what it means to you, Dylan. That's what it's all about. It's not what it's all about. It's something else.
Something bigger going on. Something bigger. I also
I mean,
find that
go ahead.
zooming out sometimes and thinking about the world outside of myself or anyone for that matter is helpful for happiness. And it's deeper than happiness, but meaning, let's say.
Yeah. It's asking
So,
different questions. Einstein once said, you know what? It's not that our answers are wrong, but our questions aren't big enough. And I remember asking
mm,
a kind of a cuckoo question. I said, why do we love our children so much? Like watching my boy right now and my daughter-in-law, this 8-pound hunk of flesh, this little beautiful little girl, the beautiful boy that's now 3.5. Why would you give your life for this thing on day one? 90% of parents many parents would do that. Give their life for that kid to save that kid's life. Why? Well, you love them. Is that enough of an answer? There's another piece. And you realize that perhaps on a deep archetypal level, of course there's personal love. It's your child, your genes, and all that kind of, right? Every child represents a belief in tomorrow. There's a belief that there's going to be tomorrow and that our species will go on. I think in many ways that's part of why this unbounded love and unbounded devotion to these kids go on. I mean, we've all done it. I raised my boy and pretty much as a single parent for many years. And you do everything. You make yourself exhausted to take care of them, to do the best you can. Why? It's not only the personal love is a part of the story, but you realize it's also in service of the preservation of the species. And that's not trying to take the love away. It's realizing both are there. And I'll tell you one little story. I've got to go in a few minutes. A colleague, a very brilliant and wonderful woman named Dvora Kinsky. Excuse me. She was born in Poland. She's probably now 95, maybe 100 years old today. A Jungian analyst in Israel. And I had the chance of meeting her. And she lived through Auschwitz. Survived. And we're talking about grandkids. She said, you know what? Especially when you're in the camps, you know what grandkids are? It's a belief in tomorrow. It's a belief in your future, that they can't take that away from us. You see what I'm getting at? You're trying to understand not only what I feel, the love for the child. I would give my body parts. I would die, give every penny I have to the kids can live, and you go live in the trailer, whatever you got to do. Live in the streets if you have to make the kids okay. But it's something transpersonal. It's not only that's the other big gift of Jung. It's not just the personal dynamics that are the most important. They're important, no question. If you don't love your kids, you got a problem. Okay, it's simple. But the fact that you would give your life to this baby that was just born, or to 4 weeks old or 4 months old, you give your life for them tomorrow. You jump in front of a car, whatever. Why? Because there is something archetypal about it. You ever hear something called the wounded bird? The wounded wing. It's unbelievable. Go online if you haven't seen it on YouTube. A mama bird, say they've got their nest right here, right? And they know there's a predator nearby. They will leave their nest and go maybe, pretty far away from the nest, and then start doing this crazy dance as though the one arm, like imagine your arm's broken. And they'll flap around and you can't move and you can't move. They become the predator for the prey, so they leave the kids alone. You realize how powerful it is? That's the field of ethology, the study of animal patterns in the wild, which I'm really interested in. That's telling you that's an archetype at play. It's the archetype of the parental that's willing to give its life for the survival of the next generation.
It's cool to hear you talk about this too, because and maybe I could send it to you, but I did some writing on Substack, and one of the things that I talked about is survival as an expression. It's often looked at like instinct and survival are one thing, and cosmic love are another thing, but I think that they're so intertwined, and that survival itself, this desire to live and pass on, is a manifestation of the most profound love that we have.
Exactly.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's profound stuff. Yeah, way cool. Some people call it agape, the love for humanity, and realizing there is this universal force that shapes us. And again, when you look at what's really driving the behavior, not just what you or I think, but what is nature telling us by this behavior? Then you get closer to the archetypal, of what we call archetypal, spiritual, whatever. You see it. What's running through humanity that we have these so many bombs that could annihilate 50 million people at a pop? What is it? What's going on? In many ways, is it our desire to be like God, that we can choose who lives and dies? That's part of it. Oppenheimer, when he made the atomic bomb, I did a whole study of this. I gave a big lecture about this. Why war? And Oppenheimer, after he created the atomic bomb, he was the father of the atomic bomb. I did the movie 2 years ago now, right? Mm-hmm. He said, basically, I'll paraphrase, now I'm like a god. I can will who lives and dies. I'm the creator of life and death. That may be what's behind it. Look, we have Frankenstein. We have a lot of stories where we want to create life and be able to decide who lives and dies. It's part of humanity's hubris. Well, I would love to talk more. I have to go back to work.
Absolutely, my friend. Thank you so much for doing this. And we didn't even get into I got your first book, but
call me again. I'd be a joy. You want to talk again? I'll do it in a heartbeat with you. Okay.